Okay, well, welcome to the new year. It is January 2026, and I've been feeling a little bit unproductive. And my solution to this is to make this devlog and force myself to write down a little bit more of kind of what I've been doing, what I've been working on, so I can remember it and maybe even come back to it later. I hope you also find this interesting, but expect it to be my kind of more of a yappy face cam video. This is definitely not a tutorial. So there have been a couple ideas that have been bobbling around in my head lately. I think they can roughly fall into, or the high level ones anyway, can roughly fall into like YouTube format, a mesh shaders, demos and videos that I'm working on, and some upgrades to Bevy and stuff like that. And then Rust Adventure itself, which is, I think, what I spent most of this devlog on, thinking back. So when we talk about formats, which will be a short video, well, a short segment of the video, YouTube formats are basically what I am referring to when I say like styles of videos. This is things like some of the better videos on my channel are like capital Y, capital T YouTube videos, right? Like they are talks I could have given at conferences, kind of encoded into video form. They don't get made unless I can think of a thumbnail and a title to like put in front of them, things like that. So if we consider this a devlog, that is another format. Then This Week in Bevy is another format. And I consider the channel to have kind of like a couple of those formats. I don't have an exhaustive list here. I also don't know if you find this interesting, so I'll roughly categorize them into like YouTube video, This Week in Bevy, which is like newsy and weekly. Release Radar and Let's Code are two formats that I've kind of let fall by the wayside as I've been focusing on making This Week in Bevy run. It's been almost 2 years of This Week in Bevy, which is the accomplishment that I wanted. So there are things like I made the original This Week in Bevy or the website at least, in about 2 weeks. And it hasn't really changed since then. I just have kind of like, it works, it goes. I've made a couple of fixes here and there for things that are egregiously broken, but nothing that is like, I wouldn't say that I'm super proud of the design of the site. I could do much better if I put a little bit more time into it. And it was just kind of like serviceable, right? Release Radar and Let's Code are videos that I've kind of let drop off a little bit over the last, we'll say, year or two. Release Radar covers like, it's effectively This Week in Bevy, but for more general stuff. So like if Clap does a release, if WGPU does a release, if Ratatouille does a release, if Rust does a release, things like that. I think I want to get back into doing a couple more of those. And I have some ideas for tooling that can help me there. There's also the Let's Code videos. I think the Let's Code videos have kind of transitioned into live streams, which are, I consider live streaming to be like a different format. But the thing that I've realized is that people are starting to say that the live streams are where the good content is, which is great for the live streams, but is potentially a bad sign for the videos. So I would like to get back to doing a couple of the things, like one of the Let's Code videos in the past has been building an app with Tori, and I just like build a small app and like talk through it as I do it, or like building the landscape generator that I did maybe last year. We could pick that back up and turn that into a compute shader demo, which I've been meaning to do for a while now. And I've kind of started focusing on these like bigger projects and bigger videos. Like Inverse Kinematics is going to be like a bigger video, which is kind of like, bigger videos take longer, right? So it would be nice to get back to doing a little bit more Let's Code stuff. If I can figure it out, I want to start a new channel this year on game design analysis. And the game design analysis channel will only exist if I can produce 4 of the videos that I'm happy with, at which point I will launch the channel with those videos. I'm anticipating those videos to be less cadence, take longer to make, kind of be second priority to the other stuff that I'm doing. I have one in development right now that's on Ball Pit, which is really cool. Ball Pit is not personally like a game that I would have normally chosen to play, but I think it has some really interesting mechanics to it. This channel would be very much around the indie side of things rather than the AAA side of things, right? I don't know that I have a lot of interesting things to say about like Fortnite or Minecraft, you know? These games that are basically so big they have sub games inside of them. I think it's far more interesting, especially as somebody who does a lot of stuff with Bevy, to talk about like Ball Pit or like other indie releases. Silksong is made by 3 people, so it fits into that category, but is a massive game. Has a lot of stuff going on. So we'll see. I wanna start with smaller games, and maybe we'll go to different mechanics and stuff like that. But I think that could be fun. I think it could be very useful, especially for the Bevy ecosystem. Which brings us to mesh shaders. Mesh shaders are the next major idea that has been kind of rattling around in my head lately. Mesh shaders landed in WGPU 28, which released after Bevy 0.16. Sorry, I was looking at another workshop this morning. It landed after Bevy 0.18's release candidates started. And its status in WGPU 28 is not fully done. So it works if you use it on Vulkan, if you use it with a WGSL front end and a Vulkan back end, and also if you can use SPIR-V pass-through. I think that also worked in WGPU 27, actually. But I don't think my Mac has a SPIR-V version new enough to actually run it, which is interesting. So that means it won't ship with Bevy until at least 0.19. So we've got a few months before it's in actually like your hands to play with, and a few months probably after that until it is like usable in a way that you would expect it to be usable in Bevy. Right now, what I'm doing is Naga Oil has a couple of things that I need to fix, and then that will let me actually import other things from the other Bevy shaders. But for right now, I'm kind of just like hard including the shaders into the WGPU raw pipelines. The mesh shader stuff is a new pipeline. So like if you think of render pipeline as like vertex fragment shader, or like a compute pipeline as a compute shader, then a mesh shader pipeline is like a mesh pipeline. It's a new own thing. So it requires some integration. And you can, if you've been in the Bevy ecosystem for a while, you might know that working with vertex and fragment shaders is like got a whole stack of abstractions from very, very low, like raw WGPU, all the way up to like high level material APIs, full screen material, like things like that, right? Which is very, very, very cool. But those same abstractions kind of don't exist for compute shaders. There's some in the community, but I think that people maybe either haven't been motivated to do a lot of abstraction work for compute shaders, or are treating it kind of just as like a custom thing. Like if you need a compute shader, then it is kind of custom, it is kind of advanced, and you just kind of have to deal with that. Because you can do basically anything with a compute shader, right? So what is the abstraction there compared to like a vertex and a fragment shader? It's an open question. So mesh shaders are an extremely exciting technology, and I think this is a really good candidate for attempting to like get back to that YouTube format, like capital Y, capital T video. And I've been meaning to kind of like do that kind of video this year. So I think it's a good option. It's new. It has fairly little content on YouTube. There are fairly few tutorials out there on it. There's not that much information unless you really go looking. And if you really go looking, you can find stuff. They've been around for 5 to 7 years at this point. I think they launched like 2018, 2020 on NVIDIA and AMD, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's like, it's been a while, but they are like native. Like Alan Wake 2, I think is the only game that I can think of off the top of my head that really shipped with them. It made really good use of them, but didn't spawn a whole bunch of games that shipped with like huge mesh shader stacks or something. But some people call this like the future of rendering, and I tend to agree, but it really is the future, not the now, right? Like you can use them now, and there's platform support in a bunch of different ways. If you want to support GPUs within the last 5 years, you're still good. If you want to support WebGL and GPUs from 15 years ago, then you're kind of out of luck and you need a fallback. So like there's trade-offs, but I'll get into that into like the video. There is a high level of flexibility. It is a low level API at the moment. Like I said, there's no like high level abstractions. So if you don't take advantage of the new stuff, then it doesn't do better than a vertex and fragment shaders or like a compute and a vertex and fragment shader or whatever. The new stuff is like meshlets, right? Meshlets are like one of the things that fit into this new mesh shader pipeline like really, really well for various reasons that I'll get to in the video. But yeah, and like you can think of Nanite and stuff like that. Although I don't think Nanite hard requires mesh shaders, but it will take advantage of them if it can. So basically, I've ingested like all of the talks and written content about mesh shaders that have been produced in the last 5 years. So at this point, I know quite a bit about them. I haven't obviously deployed them like Alan Wake has deployed them. So like there's some things that I still don't know. And this is kind of like my research process for doing these examples, making these videos. This is like the research process I follow for everything, right? Ingest all the content that I can about the thing, learn the thing, make sure I know the thing before I do it. I built and run the WGPU mesh shader examples. I built my own WGPU raw mesh shader examples. I did the work to upgrade Bevy to WGPU 28, which hasn't merged yet because there's still a Naga oil issue that needs to get fixed. I've integrated mesh shaders on top of that work into Bevy's pipeline, so I can do things like use the depth path, or not the depth path, not the pre-pass that is like the texture, but the like texture that is the built-in WGPU depth texture. Not that those are like super different things, but slight difference there. And I've started building a series of demos. I've started building kind of like super basics. That is just like, here's a bunch of cube grids. I've started building grass demos and some other stuff. So I want to get into like isosurface extraction and some other things, but they're turning into a lot of pretty cool demos. It's been very fun to play with, especially when it lives alongside the rest of a Bevy application and can interact with a depth buffer and cameras and stuff like that. So there's a lot more to come on this front. Obviously, I'm kind of skipping over a lot of stuff, and I'll leave it there for now. The third major topic is that the Rust Adventure site needs some updates. And the driving force behind this is I've kind of fallen in love with Typst as a content authoring format and believe it yields real gains when it comes to writing and maintaining educational content. There is right now some work to make Typst work on the web. So Typst does PDF really, really, really well, right? It doesn't do HTML as well right now. I would bucket it into like very early adopter status for HTML. Like it's serviceable, it works for me, but it's not out of the box, right? Like technically speaking, it's out of the box, but there are some restrictions and some stuff that you need to do. You need to like write a lib.type, and if you use things that are images on a CDN, you have to deal with that somehow. And not all of the headers have, HTML heading like IDs and stuff like that. So you need to like figure out how you're going to do that. There's a couple of things that need to be like done. But I'm a huge fan of it. It's working out really well for me. And I want to transition all of the content on Rust Adventure to Typst, which requires some site updates. Also, Bevy is updating or has updated yet again. 0.18 release isn't actually going to ship stably until maybe next week, but we'll see. I've been quietly building up more and more conceptual level content in addition to real world games like Flappy Bird, 2048, Snake, Asteroids, these other things. But handling the volume of content that results in requires an efficient approach. Otherwise, this stuff will just end up like bit rotting effectively. So Typst is really, really important to me in that sense. So I started off the year working on the architecture a bit. The first thing I did on the path to Typst for Rust Adventure was infrastructure updates. This isn't particularly interesting, so I don't have like B-roll or anything about the I shipped this. I like upgraded my cargo lock. I shipped it to GitHub Actions 30 times and it failed 29 and then it worked. If you work with CI, you know how that goes. But the architecture might be interesting, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, I guess. The whole site is a Leptos-based site using islands, which is, in my opinion, a great choice for content-based sites. It's basically like the formalized, like unified version of what I remember doing 15, 20 years ago. It really has been that long. In jQuery, like shipping a bunch of jQuery scripts, having a server render, and just quote unquote rehydrating the pieces that needed to be interactive. But that always had issues scaling up. And I think that there are significant real architectural problems with using two different stacks, right? Like if you use Rust or Go or, whatever, a backend language, insert backend language here on the backend, and you use like React or Vue or Svelte or whatever on the front end, that results in effectively at some point like writing the same code twice in two places, maintaining it twice in two places. There are things you just can't like integrate across that boundary. And there's a whole bunch of stuff there that is like problematic. So if you can get people who can do both of those things well, which obviously are highly skilled people, then you can get rid of a lot of the architectural restrictions there. But over the last, like, I'm going to call it 10 years, we'll call it since Backbone kind of died out and React kind of rose up and Node.js really came in, like a couple years after Node.js came in. This kind of like idea of, if you think about like microservices or services in general, you think about like, okay, you have like maybe an API service and a database service, and like there really wasn't like a front end service per se, but the advent of some of these technologies that can run both in the browser with JavaScript or whatnot and in the server with Node.js and use the same code led to this like UI service that is actually kind of a nice thing, right? I gave a talk at RustConf not last year, but the year before, about kind of Leptos and Wasm and like that modern stack. So if you want more information there, go watch that conference talk, which I think probably did a pretty good job. There's other conference talks that like Greg, the maintainer of Leptos, has given that are also very good. If you're interested in that kind of like modern architecture that I just mentioned, definitely go check those out. I've been using Leptos since before it released officially, and I really cannot say how thankful I am for the team and community that maintains it. After more than a decade building with this web tech, Leptos has really been an absolute joy. I will never say that there aren't like drawbacks or caveats, but when the comparison is, I don't want to mention any specific framework or technology here. When the comparison is things that I've used in the past, we'll say, Leptos is not any worse and is a real viable option. There are absolutely things I would fix, just like in any framework that I would use, right? You can't really use something and think it's perfect because you see the rough edges if you actually deploy it. Like, it's still web development and you still have to contend with that. And that is a hard problem in general. But I can say that my Rust servers run smoother than other approaches I've used in the past. And like having that modern unified interface to building either static or client side or server side or combinations thereof style sites is like just a really nice thing to have available. Which brings me to the database. Like, I have to update the database to get, you know, this new Leptos like Rust Adventure Typist stuff to work. So I have some aging GitHub workflows that I probably could have kept up a little bit more, but I didn't. So they were kind of aging. They did work for the most part. They've worked for years, is what I'll say. So the time investment I put into them was worth it. I bumped all the Leptos steps. I updated the GitHub workflows. I forked one of the session libraries I used because of something that you actually may find interesting, I think. I don't allow schema migrations from live services in my deployed applications. I treat my database as its own service and handle migrations using like a Git-style branching approach. I don't have the capacity to run something like Ghost. So I pay for a database service that provides the branching because I want to write like a sequential pile of SQL files and such, and I want to apply those migrations and use the things that my database provides, right? Like, I don't want to use an ORM that prevents me from being able to use, I don't know. I'm actually using MySQL on the back end right now, but like if I was using some niche version or niche tool in Postgres, which has a bunch of lovely extensions, like I want to be able to use those things, and writing SQL is kind of like the most direct route to being able to use like the actual unique capabilities of your database. There are interesting tools for doing SQL-based migrations like Sketch, but on this project, I'm not using them because there isn't actually a whole lot of schema change going on at any given time. I'm the only person working on it. There isn't a lot of like coordination that needs to happen, so I kind of keep the overhead low and I just kind of like have the SQL files. I use a service, like I said, that allows me to branch off, apply to that branch, and then like PR that schema change back into my actual database schema, which will then alert me to like if there are any problems with that, which is really nice. So after the infrastructure upgrades, I made changes to the database schema, which will now store the original Typist docs with their HTML output. I don't love double storing, I will say. I intend to switch this out to compiling on demand and throw the HTML and database kind of like cache out at some point in the future. But I'm playing by the motto, make it work, then do whatever the hell you were going to sidetrack on later, which may never get done. This is a serviceable solution. There are things I can do in like an admin app and stuff to make sure that I only update the typist and that the HTML is automatically compiled and updated and things like that. So there are ways to work around that. I'm not like writing HTML. I'm not customizing the HTML. So like I'm not going to have to worry about most of those problems. But with that infrastructure upgrade in place, GitHub Actions. Hey, I didn't actually mention much about the GitHub Actions that I did. So I do a 2-stage release and deploy on GitHub. So like releasing and deploying don't have to be the same thing, right? This allows me to have the relevant data available to like roll back instantly. And I do actually have a man, I forget what it's called. A workflow, no, one of the GitHub Actions that you can trigger with a curl command. That can like actually do the deploy. So the first workflow that runs when I merge to main handles all the testing, building, application, gets tarred up in case of the static files and Dockerized in the case of the server itself. And those assets get pushed to either GitHub assets or the Docker registry I use, and thus are available to be identified and fetched via git tag or date time at any time that I need to deploy a specific version via that webhook action that I mentioned before. The assets are created as a GitHub release, and the release the assets are created as a GitHub release, and a release action fires as a result, which, if you don't know, requires a personal access token for a workflow to make a release and trigger another workflow, which is really annoying. They say it's to prevent like recursive workflow runs, but I wish there was a way that I could just enable some config in the GitHub TOML file to give that token permissions to like create and trigger releases. I get why it doesn't do that. It's just annoying to have to create like personal access tokens. So the assets are created as that GitHub release, and the release action fires, which deploys the static assets to my CDN, which happens to be Netlify. I've used them for a number of years. They've been very good to me. That acts as the CDN, of course, and the server is then switched over on fly.io, which is Docker, but not Docker. It's actually Firecracker, which is very, very cool. And technically there's still opportunities where like Netlify could have like the static assets and the server fails, or the server fails and like, I don't know, the Netlify CLI silently fails. I've had that happen in the past. But I'm only one person and I can't fix AWS East 1 either. So like, at some point I have to stop investing in the infrastructure because I'm only one person, and every minute that I spend on infrastructure is a minute that I don't spend making new content. So the infrastructure updated, database ready. It's time to actually upload some Typist content and like build out the visuals, right? I've been doing some redesign and work in Figma that I think I'll show on screen. Maybe, I don't know. I don't have a lot of B-roll for this video because I'm doing it off the cuff. Maybe in the future I will prepare more B-roll. As I think through the experience people have had with Rust Adventure and with the site in general and what should happen in the future, I've been kind of like thinking through a new design of the site that focuses on that stuff. Makes things a little bit more accessible, makes things a little bit more obvious. But maybe that's for a different video, since the Figma files are not really meant to be shown to another living human being. They are my like private design Figma files, so they're just not organized at all. But that, like, I need an admin app to upload like content. I use a database, so like I need to use something to do that. I don't really want to use a third-party CMS or like content whatever thing. They would be okay, but they would have drawbacks. And obviously none of them would support Typist. So like there's some niche considerations for just my stuff. I chose web technology for the admin app again, in this case Leptos. I have a lot of experience with web tech. I contemplated doing something else, really. I contemplated using like Dioxys or Iced or something like that, but I have a video in mind for later that is going to be probably the This Week in Bevy like admin application ported to like a bunch of different native applications, and then like a video kind of like going over what that looks like in total. That will probably be after the mesh shaders video because that feels like another big honkin' video, but we'll see. When building the app, I did end up using a fun pattern that Leptos enables, which is called slots. I wanted a 3-column navigational interface where the middle sidebar could be used to house whatever is relevant for the content being rendered. This means I can use arbitrary children in my routes for the main content. Like that is the main part of the application. And that renders different content based on the URL, but I can also pick more content to build a navigational system and slot it into the sidebar, which can also be routed. So at this point, it was like January 7th, which is like a week into the year. And I've got to get this app in working order. So I took kind of a little bit of a break and came back to it on like January 8th. So it's end of January 8th, I've written about 2,500 lines of code for the admin app. It's functional, and I let myself get a little bit distracted doing some CSS animation, but not distracted enough to like accomplish the animation that I really wanted to do. Just enough animation to like sate myself and move on. I'll promise myself to come back to it later to polish stuff, but realistically, everything I do ever is going to rank above it. And nobody's going to see this app aside from the snippets that I decide to show in this video, if I do decide to show any. So I'm never going to do that. And I'm going to tell myself that I am. Rust Adventure itself is set up as like a container collection that can hold multiple versions of a workshop. Things like, well, the versions are things like Bevy 0.17 or Clap 4. The containers are things like 2048 or Build Your First CLI or something like that. Each of the variants then contains lessons, or each of the versions contains lessons, of which the content can now be written in Markdown and Typist. Although I'll be using Typist from here on out, I didn't want to have to go back and like update everything. So I just left the Markdown supported. Maybe I'll remove the old Markdown content from display on the site after a while. After all, a lot of it like eventually ages out, at which point, like, do I need to keep... Let's like there was a Bevy 0.6 version of 2048, for example. Is there anybody that needs to be able to access Bevy 0.6 version of 2048? Probably not. Is it worth updating that document? Probably not. We're at 0.18 now, and there's a 0.18 version of 2048, which is like what everybody will be reaching for. So I don't know. Depends. I think that I don't like breaking URLs, but also really, 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 truly old stuff isn't really relevant anymore and probably shouldn't appear like in the sitemap or navigation. So maybe it'll still be there behind the scenes and I'll just like canonicalize the URL to the new stuff. Articles also have to be converted to Typist though. And the admin interface for that is way simpler than the admin interface for workshops. And to test the whole workflow, obviously I need a workshop to test it with. I have 2 that I can use right away. I have a Flappy Bird implementation for 0.18 and a Rust introduction workshop. So I'll use those to drive kind of the last critical features of the admin app. And the 2 days that I spent on the interface up to that point already feels like a lifetime in my notes. But it is critical for me to be able to lower the costs of producing this content. So it's worth it in the long term, even if it gives me a little bit of a delay over the last week or so. I did make use of a new CSS feature called field sizing content. For text areas, which is really, really nice. It automatically sizes the text to the content inside of them for text areas, which is like mind-boggling. It is not supported in Firefox, so I just have to not use that, which is fine for this application. It's an admin app. I hope that Firefox gets on board because then it's available everywhere and I can use it in actual applications. It's available everywhere else, as far as I can tell. But tomorrow, or like the day after I wrote these notes, I guess, I was going down to the airport to meet a friend who's in town for a short period of time, so I had to stop working on it at that point. I'm hoping to have like all of that work done by the end of this weekend. It is Sunday when I'm recording this video. So this video probably goes out on Monday, and then This Week in Bevy on Tuesday. And I still have to do all of This Week in Bevy work, or like a decent amount of the This Week in Bevy work. So gotta handle that. So on January 10th, which is Saturday, I wouldn't say I completed the whole admin interface, but it was serviceable, and I shifted my focus to content development. The admin app will serve its purpose, and I'll improve it as I go. And I remind myself constantly that nobody's actually going to see this unless I show it in this video, so it doesn't matter how it looks. But that didn't stop me from doing a couple things that I just enjoy for myself. I like bright colors. I like dark themes. I like a little bit of animation. Like the occasional CSS animation is like 5 to 7 lines of code total. So it's not even that hard to implement. Throwing them on everything isn't really great, but you know, I did a couple things for myself, really. Content-wise, I do have those 2 workshops ready to go to test the process, the Rust Quick Start language content and the Flappy Bird for Bevy 0.18. This is the big switch to Typist, so the content takes a little bit more effort than usual, especially around solving some issues like the fact that Typist doesn't allow URLs and images. If you have one and it reaches the built-in, or actually even if it doesn't reach in the built-in image implementation, if it reaches the validation for the built-in image implementation, it will choke on, or it will actually like compile fail on that URL that is like a CDN URL. So I had to solve this problem on my personal site, which is also a Leptos-based site, but it's a static site. And in that situation, I solved this problem by aligning the local files with their eventual URLs on the CDN, which is just like slash whatever, like slash assets slash whatever slash thing, right? That assets is basically locally a folder, and on the server, the static directory, and that all works. But that won't work for Rust Adventure because I use an image hosting service that offers some additional features like image resizing, so people get like smaller images if they're on their phone, which is nice. So I think that's about it for the devlog this week. I'll show maybe a demo of like a brief version that I recorded while I was building the admin app, but there's plenty still to like work on. And I do have actually the site itself rendering the Typist content. So the devlog really helped me solve the problem of feeling like I was a bit unproductive. So it did the thing for me. If you found this interesting, or you have any like questions about really any of the things that I talked about, feel free to leave those in the comments as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Probably this video comes out on Monday, but the one after that would be This Week in Bevy on Tuesday. So I will see you back again for that one. And have a great rest of your week, or whatever day it is.